So I wanted to make this video because I've made very serious allegations, and I do stand by them against multiple judges and attorneys in the Circuit Court of Cook County. But I feel like when I raise serious allegations of corruption and negligence, then I should also explain why someone would do it. But I just want to stay from the start. I have an explanation, but it doesn't make sense. To put it bluntly, my ex-husband, Peter Matt, I believe, induced Michael Bender through financial incentives to orchestrate multiple post-decree rulings against me. I guess I should put it this way. He fixed my case. He bought my case for the sole purpose of emotionally abusing me, financially abusing me, and controlling me and our children. And outlandishly, like, this sounds insane because it is, he also induced the court to hide his financial crimes while using the court to attack me financially. And I think that's also a reason that it's really important to share here exactly what the court knows. I'm not bringing any information that hasn't been known by the court for multiple years while they're making these rulings, because Peter Matt is not a sophisticated Bernie Madoff. He's more like the Hamburglar. So in addition to asking why would Peter Matt induce the court to help him to harass his wife and control his children, I think it raises the question, why would any judge or court appointee protect a man who's so brazen and bizarre and frankly, as you'll see, disturbing in his tendencies? I don't like doing this. I don't like talking about my children's medical records. I don't like talking about domestic abuse in my family because I feel like I've handled it properly for years. You know, I've reported it to the court appointees. I've disclosed, and more importantly, my children have made their complaints, my children's doctors, and as it is now, it's been 5 months since I've seen my children, and I've tried everything and I don't know how to get them back. So I'm talking about it because I'm desperate and I want people to know what's happening, and to say that it's not right that our courts can be used to abuse your ex-wife because you're pissed off because she divorced you. So having said that, this video is going to be long and boring because it mostly describes financial and emotional abuse. And financial and emotional abuse, particularly by Peter Matt, it's like a fever dream mixed with a tax audit. It wears you down, it grates on you, and even to describe it, then you have to experience the tedium and annoyance. But I want to tell the truth. And that's another reason that it's important to share this, because Judge Robert Johnson and GAL Michael Bender in particular have said that I lie, that I've made things up. And I don't lie. I'm a human being. I'm an emotional. I interpret things, but I'm an honest person. And I'm not a manipulative person. I didn't make up stories of child abuse. I tried really hard not to bring that claim to the court because I was warned that it would be used to punish me. So in this video, I'm going to first describe, and this is the really boring part, my ex-husband's financial crimes. And again, I just think it's important so that you understand how outlandish it is to defend him and align with him. It truly raises the question, if he hasn't bribed you, why would you want to be associated with his financial crimes? It's insane. Next, I'm going to talk about his use of the court to abuse me, what's called vexatious litigation. It's by no means unique to my ex-husband. And it's a difficult problem, but it's especially difficult if you have a court that has zero interest in the well-being of families and children, as I do. And then finally, I'm going to talk about, and again, this is all public record. I am sharing dirty laundry, but I'm not disclosing things that haven't been disclosed to the court. But I think it's important to also describe it here because there are people in the court who are actively trying to hide things that happened and things that they know so that they can say they didn't know. So I'm going to talk about reports of child abuse, neglect, and mistreatment. So I don't usually describe my marriage as abusive. I just don't think that's accurate. I think, for one thing, part of the reason judges and courts, even good judges and courts, they don't want women to go around alleging abuse is because sometimes those terms can be weaponized. So my marriage, I think it was, to some people, imbalanced, but it was consensual. The best way I could describe it is I was very emotionally immature. My ex-husband was emotionally immature. And I really just wanted to be a Stepford wife. Like, I just thought it was a situation where I felt if I could look perfect and act perfect, then I would be loved. And he felt the same way. So, and, you know, after a while, I realized just pretending to never have emotions or needs is unsustainable. But a lot of women go through that. And also the relationship was always financially imbalanced, not just money, but also class. My ex-husband had very high opinions of himself and regarded me as sort of I don't know, like a rescued puppy because I had grown up in poverty and he came from a wealthy family. I never really thought about how finance should be controlled in a marriage, but I knew that I was looking for a very traditional marriage, so I agreed to things that kind of embarrass me now. I just let him control everything, and then when I realized that he was committing financial crimes, and I was heavily involved with him, it was a challenge, I think, for me to even understand that he was being criminal. I just wanted to think that he was mentally ill and just confused and making mistakes that, and I focused, because I'm codependent, on trying to get him to do therapy so that he would realize he shouldn't do financial crimes. Looking back, I think he had a lot more agency than I realized. So I realized around 2012 that his financial tendencies were really dangerous. At that time, I was pregnant with our second son, and I knew that our toddler son, then our older son was a toddler, had severe developmental disabilities, so he couldn't go to daycare or preschool like a normal child could. He needed a lot of support and attention from me. And I had just taken out $600,000 in loans for our business. But so I just felt really trapped because my ex-husband was defrauded multiple times, and just he ruined he claimed that he was installing a new software system, and the accountants that I was working with, because I had been doing accounting on the business, we couldn't make sense of it. So I decided to extricate myself from all of his business dealings. Now, at that time, we had bought the business in 2009, and he wanted it to be certified as a women-owned business. I didn't at first want to do that because the plan he had sold me was that I would just work part-time doing bookkeeping so I could take care of our then infant son. And he said, he, persuaded me, well, sometimes the CEO is more administrative. You do the tax and paperwork, and you can be the CEO. So I agreed to that. But then in 2012, as I became more and more concerned, specifically, he had financial assets in other countries and he just wouldn't report them here. And I had talked to an accountant who said, he needs to do that. And I was worried about fines. I wasn't really thinking about crimes at that point. And he just was very adamant, there's no double taxation. And, in retrospect, that also was hiding the assets from me. But I guess I was naive or stupid. That never occurred to me. He also, this is really stupid too. He told me that, because I was the CEO, to be a women-owned business, I had a salary that we paid taxes on. But he said that, you can get so much more money in the margins in the business than in a savings account. Why would you want to take the money out? And I really wanted to, but he just wouldn't let me have my salary. So except for the first year, like 2009, I never got to have any of my salary. So by the time I left the marriage, there was a balance sheet of a loan I'd made to the company of about $300,000. And eventually he bought the business from me for $50,000, which was fine because he also bought the liabilities and he could have them. So I really focused when I left the business on trying to build a bookkeeping business with the accountants who left with me. And I just hoped that he would get a job and a normal income because we never had an income. And again, he always said it was just smart to use credit cards because then we could get miles, because I also learned that I always wanted to be flying to Germany with him. I didn't know that before the marriage. So I wouldn't really have money. I would just use the credit card. And so we were, because we had to separate personal, I know that we, probably spent around $3,000 a month on the credit card. And then we spent another, $15,000 for taxes. But one thing that always made me nervous was when I didn't really agree, but when my ex-husband told me that he was stopping working in banks and wanted to be a business owner, I, at that time, had an infant. I didn't love that idea, but I knew that he had personal wealth. I knew he was going to inherit about, I think it was $800,000 in Germany, which he did, and then that his dad has considerable wealth. So around 2015, I had become concerned because he still wasn't making an income that he was reporting. We could still barely make ends meet. And he kept getting loans from his father. And he made jokes about how, he didn't think he'd have an inheritance because he'd borrowed all of it. And I know that his dad had given our children apartments, although he'd never let me see them. And I was worried he was also going to start selling our children's things or borrowing against our children's things. So I wrote his dad an email and asked him to please stop loaning Peter money so that he would get a job. And his dad wrote back to me that, I was silly to discourage him because the business was so successful. And he sent me all these financial documents that showed that I guess they had opened a new company in Germany. Our company in America was called Godecki and Associates. So they opened a company in Germany that was controlled by Peter and his dad. And that it was making about $300,000 a year in profit. And that, obviously the business was successful, so why would I want him to stop? And I knew that part of the reason they were hiding it from me was Peter thought I would divorce him. But I genuinely never I never had regrets or qualms about leaving that money on the table because in my mind, that money was already going to be paid for some tax bill that was going to come someday. So I didn't think of him as having $1 million. hidden from me. I thought of him as having $1 million that he'd hidden from the IRS, and I didn't want it. So he told me if I ever left him, it would be gloves off. He didn't believe in amicable divorces. And the first thing he did was he reached out to everyone in my family to see that I was mentally ill and that I needed help because I was thinking about destroying this wonderful marriage. And then he even went so far as he told me that he had arranged a therapist and he was going to start working on things and I should go talk to him. And it was just immediately clear that the therapist wasn't there to talk about Peter. It was sort of attempt to evaluate me. And at that time, we were working with Rosalind Sadaka, who was a collaborative divorce mediator. I was really clueless. So again, while I was thinking I could do a collaborative divorce, our business bank, had also been concerned. You know, when a couple divorces, they get concerned about money being taken out. And so they had opened a checking account at our business bank. So it's like Acme Business Bank account A, and then they opened Acme Business Bank account B. And I actually didn't have to do anything, but they set it up so whenever receipts would come in, money from our clients would come in, it would immediately go to Acme Bank account B. And so Peter started the divorce by filing a motion claiming that all the money that had been moved to the parallel account, about $100,000, that I had embezzled it. And that surprised me. That was when I learned that people will I learned two things. I first learned that you can walk into a court and just lie your ass off. And I also learned that there's no consequence for that, and it might work out really well for you. So from day one, he was lying about me committing financial crimes. And then in one of the most bizarre aspects of this, so he filed a restraining order saying I was threatening his businesses. He put in the restraining order that I was threatening Godecki Germany, Godecki India, Godecki Poland. These are, since I had stopped working at the company, he stopped reporting those companies to the IRS, and he wouldn't report their assets or bank accounts in court financial affidavits, but he would put in court documents that they exist. Honestly, I only have proof that Godecki Germany exists through things that Peter has filed. Again, Hamburglar. So then as we moved into the actual divorce, then he moved into his primary mode of attack, which is vexatious litigation, which is if there's a dispute over $500 and he can spend $20,000 in order to sue me for $10,000, he will. It's irrational. And our courts, part of the reason that vexatious litigation works is because courts assume rational actors. And somebody who's using the court to abuse his ex-wife is not rational. So normal constraints like, is this worth the dollar value? How's this going to impact the children? That's not entering into his calculus. And the court assumes that it does, to the detriment of all of us. So vexatious litigation with Peter means we've never had a dispute that he's tried to solve outside of court. It was very difficult to divorce him, but we finally did reach a settlement, and we're divorced on September 25, 2017. So most of the abuses happened after the divorce. And I do believe it's because Peter didn't want a divorce. And when he realized we were divorced, he realized that the parenting plan gave me rights that could be protected. And that has driven him crazy because he never wanted me to have rights or be able to make decisions. So my first contempt of court finding was one of the most flagrant. During our marriage, because I was the CEO, at the time of our divorce, he'd moved all the assets to Europe didn't report them, but I had personally guaranteed $600,000 in business loans on a company that he now owned. So he controlled the company. The company didn't have anywhere near the assets for the $600,000, and I was liable for it. And then so for the divorce, I was supposed to sign a quitclaim on a house. That deed went with an asset that actually existed. And then I had liabilities on business loans that were not collateralized. So I said, I can't sign the quitclaim on the quitclaim deed on the house until you take me off those liabilities. And he hadn't. And I said, well, I'll sign the quitclaim. We'll put it in escrow until you can take me off the business loans. And he called me into court. That was when I had Judge Raul Vega, who was known to be very mercurial and never read anything. And I explained it to Judge Vega, just like I just said. And I said, I'll put it in escrow. I'm not unwilling to sign the quitclaim. I'm not in contempt of court, but he hasn't taken me off the business loans. So he's not following that order. And Judge Vega agreed with me, and he was about to enter it. And I think I smiled or smirked. I did something uppity. And then Judge Vega just screamed at me, you need to learn how to keep your mouth shut sometimes. And he said, you sign that quitclaim or I'm sending you to jail. So I signed it. But that was my first finding of contempt of court. Just, you always remember your first. So then I had spent most of what I would get from Peter buying out of the house. And then the $50,000 for the business was paid to me in payments of $3,000 a month. And in the year after our divorce, that was my primary income. I didn't have a car. I had very little money. I was living in a small apartment and having a hard time. And Peter wanted our son to have an optional therapy called applied behavioral analysis, which can be very, very expensive. And we went to an intake appointment and they said it's going to cost $14,000. And Peter had driven me because I didn't have a car. And I said, there's no way I can do that. Maybe we should need to see if there's like a Medicaid option or some nonprofit that can help us. And he said, well, I'll pay for it. And he put in writing 3 times that he would pay for it. And then he sued me for those costs. So that's kind of how vexatious litigation works. You just, no matter what, if you see a way to sue your partner, you do, or ex-partner. And then when I did get employment, I had access to group health care. So this ABA, which, usually would amount to like $15,000 in auto costs. The employee plan would cap it at $2,000 and had a lot more providers. The group plans even covered the providers he already had. But Peter, instead of letting me enroll the boys in the group plan, opened a separate Obamacare plan to incur the $15,000 and then maybe $10,000 in legal costs and then sue me for that. And he did that twice. And then eventually he moved into what's been the most damaging, was getting people appointed by the court in order to cause more fees, force contact with me, and to control me. I was strongly opposed to Michael Bender, the first appointment in our case. He was appointed as a guardian ad litem, and I just understood kind of intuitively that this was a diminishment of my rights. And I now understand that I was very right legally, that there was not a basis for Michael Bender to be appointed. What Peter wanted was to force contact with me, to incur more fees, and to have somebody tell me what to do. Because we had a parenting plan that gave me the right to make choices during my parenting time. And Peter, he just hated that. He wanted to have daily contact. He wanted to be able to reprimand me if I did things that he didn't like. Like if I, one time I kept my son home to decorate our Christmas tree, and he missed soccer practice. And those are the types of things that Peter thought were seriously harmful to our children. But Peter always wanted to have daily contact with me and force me to go with him to therapy at least weekly. And this is a year after we were divorced. To put it simply, he just didn't think I had a right to be divorced. And the circuit court has pretty much let him buy the right to not let me be divorced. That's kind of where we are now. I don't have control over my financial future. I don't have parental rights. He's been pretty successful, but that's more of a bigger picture. So when Michael Bender was appointed, I tried to get him to leave. There is a law for a guardian ad litem. They're appointed to write a report during any proceeding, but there was no proceeding. Usually it's during a divorce. We're already divorced. So that means he'll never leave because the proceeding will never be wrapped up. It's just one of those things in the circuit court. There's sort of this toxic inertia. If somebody's put in place and they shouldn't be there, you can't undo that because you'd have to admit that at some point a judge made a mistake. And from what I've seen, it's just much easier to destroy the rights of women and children than to, God forbid, make a judge feel uncomfortable or, suggest a judge made a mistake. That's a bridge too far. So that's my take. So, but while Michael Bender was appointed, I did eventually try to raise issues with him. Early on, even before we were divorced, Peter had always been a very neglectful parent. He's very self-absorbed and fixated on his projects and engrossed in his laptop. And I would come home from work and just see my 2-year-old wandering around and not know where Peter was. So we worked with a mediator to create a parenting plan. And I told her, I'm worried about Peter neglecting the children. So she put in the plan that we were supposed to have childcare when we're working. So like 9 to 5 or whatever. And Peter just wouldn't do that because he really doesn't like to spend money. And that would cause problems because he always needed our younger son to be doing sports. And also always wanted our older son to be in ABA therapy. There would be conflicts, and he couldn't just do therapy or sports on one day, and he wouldn't hire a babysitter. So first he solved it. He would just leave our son alone with, and they all happen to be male therapists, ABA therapists, for, up to an hour. And I did not like this because I used to work in childcare, and I've been through, to protect the children and the workers, policies are very, very important about, policies, staff, and children. So the ABA provider's policy was that you were not supposed to leave children alone with a therapist. And no matter what Peter thinks of that, no matter what I think of that, that's their policy. And that if you do have to leave, you're supposed to have a babysitter or another adult in the house. And Peter didn't want to do that because he thought it was unnecessary. It only bothered me because the therapist was violating a policy. So, there are a few markers that you look for with somebody abusive towards developmentally disabled people. And you should know that I believe it's something like 70% of people with developmental disabilities experience sexual assault. Maybe it's physical assault and sexual assault. It's a high number. This isn't an irrational fear on my part. It's something that I have to be vigilant about as the mother of a disabled child. So the fact that therapists were violating policy, that was a red flag to me, because part of what lets you know when someone might be doing something wrong is when they violate policies about the safety of children. That was a real problem for me, and it was something I raised to Michael Bender. And so then Peter solved it another way, which was that, my 7-year-old said to me, "Oh, I can wash my hair by myself." And I said, "Oh, that's great." And he said, "Yeah, my dad drops me off at the Y and I do everything by myself." And basically, he would drop him off on a busy Evanston Street, and he would go into the YMCA, which happens to share a building with a single resident occupancy, which is fine. You know, I'm glad it's there, but it's just, I'm being realistic about the type of setting. This isn't grandma's parlor. This is a busy urban setting with a lot of indigent men. That's just what it is. So he would drop him off by himself. Our son would check himself in, and then he would go to a basketball class, and then he would go to the shower that is shared with adult men by himself and shower, or go to swimming and then change for swimming and then shower by himself in the men's dressing room. And this is obviously against the Y's policies. There's daycare. There are drop-in programs where you drop them off and someone is in charge. And this was not that. The classes thought he was being brought there by an adult, but he wasn't. So he was being left alone for 2 hours at the Y, and Peter wouldn't stop. So I raised those to Michael Bender, and he did nothing about it. And I, again, just really wanted, knowing that Michael Bender wasn't going to help our kids, I just wanted to get rid of him because I couldn't afford his fees. Then I came to learn that Peter was having strange men live in the house with the children. And basically what I came to learn was Peter just, here's the situation for Peter. He is so much smarter than everybody else that policies that other people follow, a lot of times they just don't apply to him. So he is so smart about home construction and home safety that zoning requirements, zoning regulations, they don't apply to him. So he had this big house, and what he did was he built 3 apartments in the house. So 3 units, the attic, one on the second floor, one in the basement. He added a washer and dryer and a kitchen. And this is a single family home, zoned single family. And all of the 3 apartments had access to our minor children's living areas. And so that was his plan to make money. And I had 2 issues. I was worried about fire safety because he didn't add any fire doors or widened hallways and was cramming all these people in there. So it sounded like a tenement. And I was also concerned because he was allowing strange men in our children's home and not doing a background check and not having locked doors for our children's bedrooms. And so I asked him to get background checks, and I asked him to get it zoned, and he wouldn't comply with that. And I asked Michael Bender to help, and he didn't help with that either. During this time, he also would not recognize requirement in our parenting time hours. So basically, if he thought there was something more important for the kids to do than to come back home to me, he would just not bring them. So the first time, my younger son and I had planned to go to a community art show that was doing sidewalk chalk art, and instead Peter had a soccer activity for our younger son. It's almost always soccer. And unapologetically just didn't bring them home to me. And then another time occurred. It was my birthday. I had a brunch planned, and Peter had just again decided to take them to another soccer day. And that time I did go to the local police department because you're supposed to follow the parenting plan, and it is a violation. And the police wrote a report and said that the judge in our case should, address this with Peter. And I brought that to Michael Bender and Judge Johnson. Of course, along with the other things, it's never been mentioned, much less addressed. And it was then during COVID that my older son made the first reports of physical abuse. And it was basically, the schools were shut down. It was a very hard time for families with children with severe behavioral or developmental issues. So it was a hard time for Peter, I understand that. But Peter wanted our son to do a Zoom therapy, and our son couldn't sit in the chair, so he was holding him down and forcing him to stay in the chair, and hitting him and dragging him back when he would try to go away. And I reported that to Michael Bender. I reported it to the school. I reported it to the therapist, and I reported that to DCFS. At that time, I didn't talk to my younger son about it. I don't know. I just tend to follow the rules, and my background, like I said, I worked in education and I took classes on interviewing children. So I didn't want to raise the issue with our younger son who's neurotypical, because I thought there was going to be some kind of investigation. So I thought I shouldn't talk to him about it. And it's just better when the child initiates it, because any question that you ask a child is leading, because they always want to give their parent answers. So it's very tricky. So I did what I could, and I changed our parenting time so the boys would come to my house every day, because I thought if Peter had more respite, then he would be safer with the kids. So as I've recounted in another video, there was considerable fraud and some concerning things with another appointee who was named John Palin, who was appointed as a parenting coordinator. Again, I couldn't afford him, didn't want him, but I wasn't consultant. He was just ordered, and we had to let him help us with decisions. An issue that Peter was always raising, and he lied, but he would claim that the dispute over health insurance wasn't for him to force fees on me, that it was because he cared about getting certain providers. So I said, and Peter knows me very well. He knows that I was raised in poverty, and when I was 3, my mom lost her job and we lived in a tent for 9 months. I didn't have a phone until I was 8, and all I ever wanted, like literally all I ever wanted, was to be a mom and to have kids who were safe and not poor like me. So I said to Peter, and this is just like, when the court orders these people, you have to like say crazy things as if it's not crazy, because this is just like the weirdest, stupidest thing to say. But I'm like, Peter, let's look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. On the bottom, you have food and shelter and safety. And then, higher up are, higher needs that are more about, your thoughts and feelings. So let's say our son's therapy is really important, but it costs so much that I can't afford rent, because if I would pay everything he sued me for, I would be homeless. And I said, so if I paid all of that, I might have to be homeless, and it's hard to find a homeless shelter that will allow you to live with your children. And don't you think it would be better for our son to live with his mom? And Peter said, I'm sure you can find a homeless shelter that allows children. And John Palin just smiled and nodded as if there was. So then I realized that I needed to start documenting things more formally than just talking to Michael Bender. And actually, Judge Johnson told me, I had told him about Peter's tenement scheme. And I was like, I think you need to do something about it. And he said, well, you need to give me something in writing or I can't do it. So I figured out how to write motions. And then Judge John and I raised the issue of the child neglect. I raised the issue of the apartments. And I also, I raised the issue, so Peter, with his, I guess, paradigm that I guess I have borderline personality, one of the techniques that he started, and it's probably one of the most effective ways to really drive me crazy, is that he decided that to make basically a verbal game, anytime I ever say anything, he would say, I understand. But, and if you've gone to couples counseling, you know what they're saying. We're like, oh, you have to validate. But he would do it in such a creepy, weird way. It was just disturbing. So it was just like, I understand. When I raised, hey, what are our rules for COVID? My mom has cancer. So what do we agree to? Then he would respond, I understand, and always the point is, I understand you're a crazy bitch and we're all going to pretend. And it's just creepy. So I'd raise that. The mistreatment of the children and the failure to provide childcare, because it was in our parenting plan that he was supposed to provide childcare, and it was there for a reason, because he's neglectful. And Judge Johnson, first he said, I'll give these to Bender. If there's something there, he'll have me see them. And of course, Michael Bender never saw something there if it was filed by me or if it discredited Peter. Robert Johnson said to Michael Bender and Peter's attorney, Chris Werman, he said, you're going to have to find a 60410B or she's just going to keep doing this, which meant that telling the truth about Peter's misconduct in writing. So Dr. Gerald Bleckman was appointed as a custody evaluator. Again, since there was no motion to change the parenting plan, I don't think there was a legal basis, but he was appointed. This custody evaluation process, very suspicious of Dr. Bleckman, and I think for good reason. But part of the process was interviewing me with the children. And at one point, I was there with both of our boys, and my younger son really started acting distressed. And so Dr. Bleckman wanted me to bring him back on his own. And so I brought him back, just the two of us. And at first I offered to leave, but he said he wanted me there for the appointment. And during the course of the appointment, my younger son just got really upset, talking about saying he was no good at anything, and said that he wanted to kill himself. It was really hard. I'd never heard that before. And I asked Dr. Bleckman, who was a psychologist, I think, not a psychiatrist. I asked him if I should take him to his therapist, and Dr. Bleckman just said to keep talking to him about his feelings, try to get some books. And that evening I did order a book of cards to talk about feelings, and my younger son did enjoy those. But then the next day after camp, and it was Tuesday, and Tuesdays are usually hard with my boys because they would be going back to their dads on Wednesdays. And this was in the summer of 2021. They had both, and they hadn't done this before, but they had, around the time I was seeing Dr. Bleckman, they'd both talked about how they didn't want to go to their dads at all. So after this appointment the appointment was on Monday, and then on Tuesday, I picked up my younger son from camp, and we were driving to the pool, and he had the plastic wrapper from, a freezer pop or Otter Pop, and he put it over his mouth, and he said, I'm going to stop breathing, and he said if I took him to the pool, he was going to sit on the bottom of the pool and stop breathing. And I said, if you don't have to go to your dad's, would you want to kill yourself? And he said no. And I said, well, maybe, we can try to make that happen. And he said, but won't my dad be mad at you? And that was really hard because
I didn't know that my boys knew that their dad hurt me. I thought that I had hidden that. So I was concerned because he wasn't just talking about hurting himself. So I called his doctor and asked her the next day if I should let him go to camp. And she said, no, you should not let him go to camp. You should keep him home until I see him. And it took a while to get him in there. So he had to actually go back to his dad's, to Peter, before we went to see his pediatrician, Dr. Brunner. So his dad brought our younger son to the pediatrician, and I was there, and she asked us not to talk, and she just talked to our son, and she said, do you know why you're here? And he said, because I said I wanted to kill myself. And she asked him some questions which kind of determined that at his age he didn't developmentally understand, so the threat of self-harm wasn't as imminent, which was, I was glad she explained that to me. But then she said, you know, sometimes kids say that they want to kill themselves because they want to say something else and they don't know how. Is there something else that's bothering you? And my son said, I don't want to go to my dad's. And he said, and I don't want to do the Northwestern program. Because on top of making him be a professional soccer athlete by going to 3 hours of soccer every day during school, Peter was also making him do an enrichment class that he really just didn't want to do at the Northwestern Center for Talent Development. And I'm more than happy to share their name because they were well informed. My son said he would rather kill himself than do their program, and they were quite happy to take money and make him do it. So I and my son's pediatrician that night called Michael Bender to report her concerns, and she wrote that she had 2 recommendations, which was that our son not go to his dad's. And so then he was at his dad's because there was a court order, parenting plan, and then he came back to my house, both the boys did, so I just thought I should ask him, because of what my other son had reported during COVID. And I said, you know, during COVID lockdowns, your brother said that your dad was hitting him and kicking him and dragging him. Is that true? And he said, oh yeah, it was really bad during COVID. And I said, has your dad ever hit you? And he started to cry. And I said, where on your body? And he put his hand on his right cheek. And I said, why? And he said, he said it was because he said he didn't want to do Northwestern. And he also said that his dad locked him in his room to make him do his extra math worksheets, and told him that if he didn't do his Northwestern class, he was going to make him stay up all night to do it. So at this time, my younger son was sick. He had an ear infection. And so the next day he had an appointment with another doctor from his practice, Shoshana Waskow. And he reported to her that his dad was hitting him, and she asked him how his dad's hand was, and he showed a backhand, which I think would hit him. So then when he had made the reports to Dr. Brunner, she put it in the online notes platform. But then after that appointment, I looked online and there were no notes. So I went to the doctor's office the next day and asked for the notes, and they said that Dr. Brunner wanted to talk to me. And I talked to Dr. Brunner, and she said, I can't give you the notes because then we'd have to give them to Peter. And she said that they made a sealed report and that she called Michael Bender. A lot of things really make me upset about the way my children have been treated. But before my son said what he said to Dr. Bleckman and Dr. Brunner, I had told him, I said, judges and doctors, they want to help kids. So you just tell the truth. And he did. The last time I saw him and was allowed to talk to him was in September. And he said to me, why don't you just buy Judge Judy to fix it? And I wish I could. But on the one hand, I feel like that's so naive of him to think that's how courts work. But I don't think I know how courts work. Judge Johnson knows all of this. Michael Bender knows all of this. There was no evidence or facts given when they took my parental rights away, but they did say that I lied. I didn't lie. Their doctor reports. And the reports of the court's own appointees. I'm not the one who's lying.